Tomato. The tomato is the edible berry of the plant Solanum lycopersicum, commonly known as the tomato plant. The species originated in western South America and Central America. The Mexican Nahuatl word tomate gave rise to the Spanish word tomate, from which the English word tomato derived. Its domestication and use as a cultivated food may have originated with the indigenous peoples of Mexico. The Aztecs used tomatoes in their cooking at the time of the Spanish conquest of the Aztec Empire, and after the Spanish encountered the tomato for the first time after their contact with the Aztecs, they brought the plant to Europe, in a widespread transfer of plants known as the Columbian exchange. From there, the tomato was introduced to other parts of the European-colonized world during the 16th century. Tomatoes are a significant source of umami flavor. It is consumed in diverse ways, raw or cooked, and in many dishes, sauces, salads, and drinks. While tomatoes are fruits, botanically classified as berries, they are commonly used culinarily as a vegetable ingredient or side dish. Numerous varieties of the tomato plant are widely grown in temperate climates across the world, with greenhouses allowing for the production of tomatoes throughout all seasons of the year. Tomato plants typically grow to 1 to 3 meters, 3 to 10 feet, in height. They are vines that have a weak stem that sprawls and typically needs support. Indeterminate tomato plants are perennials in their native habitat, but are cultivated as annuals. Determinate, or bush, plants are annuals that stop growing at a certain height and produce a crop all at once. The size of the tomato varies according to the cultivar, with a range of 1 to 10 centimeters, half-4 in width. Etymology. The word tomato comes from the Spanish tomate, which in turn comes from the Nahuatl word tomate pronunciation, helpmiddle.info, meaning swelling fruit, also fat water or fat thing. The native Mexican tomatillo is tomate. When Aztecs started to cultivate the fruit to be larger, sweeter and red, they called the new variety tomatl, or jitomatesh, pronounced, plump with navel or fat water with navel. The specific name lycopersicum, from the 1753 book Species Plantarum, is of Greek origin, lambda kappa omicron pi epsilon rho sigma iota kappa omega nu, lycopersicon, meaning wolf peach. Botany. Description. Tomato flower. An unripe tomato growing on the vine. This section needs additional citations for verification. Please help improve this article by adding citations to reliable sources. Unsourced material may be challenged and removed. April 2022, learn how and when to remove this template message. Tomato plants are vines, initially decumbent, typically growing 180 centimeters, 6 feet, or more above the ground if supported, although erect bush varieties have been bred, generally 100 centimeters, 3 feet 3 in, tall or shorter. Indeterminate types are tender perennials, dying annually in temperate climates. They are originally native to tropical highlands, although they can live up to 3 years in a greenhouse in some cases. Determinate types are annual in all climates. Tomato plants are dicots, and grow as a series of branching stems, with a terminal bud at the tip that does the actual growing. When the tip eventually stops growing, whether because of pruning or flowering, lateral buds take over and grow into other, fully functional, vines. Tomato vines are typically pubescent, meaning covered with fine short hairs. The hairs facilitate the vining process, turning into roots wherever the plant is in contact with the ground and moisture, especially if the vine's connection to its original root has been damaged or severed. Most tomato plants have compound leaves, and are called regular leaf, RL, plants, but some cultivars have simple leaves known as potato leaf, PL, style because of their resemblance to that particular relative. Of RL plants, there are variations, such as rugose leaves, which are deeply grooved, and variegated, Angora leaves, which have additional colors where a genetic mutation causes chlorophyll to be excluded from some portions of the leaves. The leaves are 10 to 25 centimeters, 4 to 10 in, long, odd pinnate, with 5 to 9 leaflets on petioles, each leaflet up to 8 centimeters, 3 in, long, with a serrated margin. Both the stem and leaves are densely glandular hairy. Their flowers, appearing on the apical meristem, have the anthers fused along the edges, forming a column surrounding the pistil style. Flowers in domestic cultivars can be self-fertilizing. The flowers are 1 to 2 centimeters, half-3/4 in, across, yellow, with 5 pointed lobes on the corolla, they are born in a cyme of 3 to 12 together. Although in culinary terms, tomato is regarded as a vegetable, its fruit is classified botanically as a berry. As a true fruit, it develops from the ovary of the plant after fertilization, its flesh comprising the pericarp walls. The fruit contains hollow spaces full of seeds and moisture, called locular cavities. These vary, among cultivated species, according to type. Some smaller varieties have 2 cavities, globe-shaped varieties typically have 3 to 5, beefsteak tomatoes have a great number of smaller cavities, while paste tomatoes have very few, very small cavities. For propagation, the seeds need to come from a mature fruit, and be dried or fermented before germination. Classification. In 1753, Linnaeus placed the tomato in the genus Solanum, alongside the potato, as Solanum lycopersicum. In 1768, Philip Miller moved it to its own genus, naming it Lycopersicon esculentum. The name came into wide use, but was technically in breach of the plant naming rules because Linnaeus's species name Lycopersicum still had priority. Although the name Lycopersicum was suggested by Karsten, 1888, it is not used because it violates the International Code of Nomenclature barring the use of tautonyms in botanical nomenclature. The corrected name Lycopersicum, Nicholson 1974, was technically valid, because Miller's genus name and Linnaeus's species name differ in exact spelling, but since Lycopersicon esculentum has become so well known, it was officially listed as a nomen conservandum in 1983, and would be the correct name for the tomato in classifications which do not place the tomato in the genus Solanum. Genetic evidence has now shown that Linnaeus was correct to put the tomato in the genus Solanum, making Solanum lycopersicum the correct name. Both names, however, will probably be found in the literature for some time. 2 of the major reasons for considering the genera separate are the leaf structure, tomato leaves are markedly different from any other Solanum, and the biochemistry, many of the alkaloids common to other Solanum species are conspicuously absent in the tomato. On the other hand, hybrids of tomato and diploid potato can be created in the lab by somatic fusion, and are partially fertile, providing evidence of the close relationship between these species. Genetics and genetic modification. Genome. An international consortium of researchers from 10 countries, began sequencing the tomato genome in 2004. A pre-release version of the genome was made available in December 2009. The complete genome for the cultivar Heinz 1706 was published on May 31, 2012 in Nature. The latest reference genome published in 2021 had 799 megabytes and encodes 34,384, predicted, proteins, spread over 12 chromosomes. Genetic modification. Since many other fruits, like strawberries, apples, melons, and bananas share the same characteristics and genes, researchers stated the published genome could help to improve food quality, food security and reduce costs of all of these fruits. The first commercially available genetically modified food was a tomato called Flavor Saver, which was engineered to have a longer shelf life. However, it is no longer commercially available. Scientists are continuing to develop tomatoes with new traits not found in natural crops, such as increased resistance to pests or environmental stresses or better flavor. Breeding. The Tomato Genetic Resource Center, Germplasm Resources Information Network, (AVRC), and numerous seed banks around the world store seed representing genetic variations of value to modern agriculture. These seed stocks are available for legitimate breeding and research efforts. While individual breeding efforts can produce useful results, the bulk of tomato breeding work is at universities and major agriculture-related corporations. These efforts have resulted in significant regionally adapted breeding lines and hybrids, such as the Mountain Series from North Carolina. Corporations including Heinz, Monsanto, Vinseed, and Veozaid have breeding programs that attempt to improve production, size, shape, color, flavor, disease tolerance, pest tolerance, nutritional value, and numerous other traits. Fruit versus vegetable. Tomatoes are considered a fruit or vegetable depending on context. According to Encyclopaedia Britannica, tomatoes are a fruit labeled in grocery stores as a vegetable due to the taste and nutritional purposes. Tomatoes plain and sliced. Botanically, a tomato is a fruit, a berry, consisting of the ovary, together with its seeds, of a flowering plant. However, The tomato is considered a culinary vegetable because it has a much lower sugar content than culinary fruits, because it is more savory, umami, than sweet. It is typically served as part of a salad or main course of a meal, rather than as a dessert. Tomatoes are not the only food source with this ambiguity. Bell peppers, cucumbers, green beans, eggplants, avocados, and squashes of all kinds, such as courgettes/zucchini and pumpkins, are all botanically fruit, yet cooked as vegetables. This has led to legal dispute in the United States. In 1887, U.S. tariff laws that imposed a duty on vegetables, but not on fruit, caused the tomato status to become a matter of legal importance. In Nix v. Hedden, the U.S. Supreme Court settled the tariff controversy on May 10, 1893, by declaring that the tomato is a vegetable. Based on the popular definition that classifies vegetables by use, they are generally served with dinner and not dessert. The holding of this case applies only to the interpretation of the tariff of 1883, and the court did not purport to reclassify the tomato for botanical or other purposes. History? Solanum lycopersicum var. Lycopersicum, the oldest surviving tomato fruit and leaves. Page from the NTB Herbarium, 1558. Naturalis Leiden. The wild ancestor of the tomato, Solanum pimpinellifolium, is native to western South America. These wild versions were the size of peas. The first evidence of domestication points to the Aztecs and other peoples in Mesoamerica, who used the fruit fresh and in their cooking. The Spanish first introduced tomatoes to Europe, where they became used in Spanish food. In France, Italy and Northern Europe, the tomato was initially grown as an ornamental plant. It was regarded with suspicion as a food because botanists recognized it as a nightshade, a relative of the poisonous belladonna. This was exacerbated by the interaction of the tomato's acidic juice with pewter plates. The leaves and immature fruit contains tomatine, which in large quantities would be toxic. However, the ripe fruit contains no tomatine. Mesoamerica. The exact date of domestication is unknown. By 500 BC, it was already being cultivated in southern Mexico and probably other areas. 13 The Pueblo people are thought to have believed that those who witnessed the ingestion of tomato seeds were blessed with powers of divination. The large, lumpy variety of tomato, a mutation from a smoother, smaller fruit, originated in Mesoamerica, and may be the direct ancestor of some modern cultivated tomatoes. 15. The Aztecs raised several varieties of tomato, with red tomatoes called tomatl and green tomatoes called tomatl, tomatillo. Bernardino de Sahagún reported seeing a great variety of tomatoes in the Aztec market at Tenochtitlan, Mexico City: large tomatoes, small tomatoes, leaf tomatoes, sweet tomatoes, large serpent tomatoes, nipple-shaped tomatoes, and tomatoes of all colors from the brightest red to the deepest yellow. Bernardino de Sahagún mentioned Aztecs cooking various sauces, some with and without tomatoes of different sizes, serving them in city markets: food sauces, hot sauces, fried, a la cooked, juices, sauces of juices, shredded with chili, with squash seeds, with tomatoes, with smoked chili, with hot chili, with yellow chili, with mild red chili sauce, yellow chili sauce, hot chili sauce, with bird excrement sauce, sauce of smoked chili, heated, bean sauce, toasted beans, cooked beans, mushroom sauce, sauce of small squash, sauce of large tomatoes, sauce of ordinary tomatoes, sauce of various kinds of sour herbs, avocado sauce. Spanish distribution. Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés may have been the first to transfer a small yellow tomato to Europe after he captured the Aztec city of Tenochtitlan, now Mexico City, in 1521. The earliest discussion of the tomato in European literature appeared in a herbal written in 1544 by Pietro Andrea Mattioli, an Italian physician and botanist, who suggested that a new type of eggplant had been brought to Italy that was blood red or golden color when mature and could be divided into segments and eaten like an eggplant, that is, cooked and seasoned with salt, black pepper, and oil. It was not until 10 years later that tomatoes were named in print by Mattioli as pomidoro, or golden apples. 13. After the Spanish colonization of the Americas, the Spanish distributed the tomato throughout their colonies in the Caribbean. They also took it to the Philippines, from where it spread to Southeast Asia and then the entire Asian continent. The Spanish also brought the tomato to Europe. It grew easily in Mediterranean climates, and cultivation began in the 1540s. It was probably eaten shortly after it was introduced, and was certainly being used as food by the early 17th century in Spain. China? The tomato was introduced to China, likely via the Philippines or Macau, in the 1500s. It was given the name Fanki, barbarian eggplant, as the Chinese named many foodstuffs introduced from abroad, but referring specifically to early introductions. Italy. The San Marzano is a well-known plum tomato highly prized for making pizza. The recorded history of tomatoes in Italy dates back to at least October 31, 1548, when the house steward of Cosimo de' Medici, the Grand Duke of Tuscany, wrote to the Medici private secretary informing him that the basket of tomatoes sent from the Grand Duke's Florentine estate at Torre del Gallo had arrived safely. Tomatoes were grown mainly as ornamentals early on after their arrival in Italy. For example, the Florentine aristocrat Giovan Vittorio Soderini wrote how they were to be sought only for their beauty, and were grown only in gardens or flower beds. The tomato's ability to mutate and create new and different varieties helped contribute to its success and spread throughout Italy. However, even in areas where the climate supported growing tomatoes, their habit of growing to the ground suggested low status. They were not adopted as a staple of the peasant population because they were not as filling as other fruits already available. Additionally, both toxic and inedible varieties discouraged many people from attempting to consume or prepare any other varieties. In certain areas of Italy, such as Florence, the fruit was used solely as a tabletop decoration, until it was incorporated into the local cuisine in the late 17th or early 18th century. The earliest discovered cookbook with tomato recipes was published in Naples in 1692, though the author had apparently obtained these recipes from Spanish sources. 17. Unique varieties were developed over the next several hundred years for uses such as dried tomatoes, sauce tomatoes, pizza tomatoes, and tomatoes for long-term storage. These varieties are usually known for their place of origin as much as by a variety name. For example, Pomodorino del Pianolo del Vesuvio is the hanging tomato of Vesuvius, or the well-known and highly prized San Marzano plum tomato grown in that region. Britain? Tomatoes for sale in a UK supermarket. Tomatoes were not grown in England until the 1590s. One of the earliest cultivators was John Gerard, a barber surgeon. Gerard's Herbal, published in 1597, and largely plagiarized from continental sources, is also one of the earliest discussions of the tomato in England. Gerard knew the tomato was eaten in Spain and Italy. Nonetheless, he believed it was poisonous. In fact, the plant and raw fruit do have low levels of tomatine, but are not generally dangerous, see below. Gerard's views were influential, and the tomato was considered unfit for eating, though not necessarily poisonous, for many years in Britain and its North American colonies. 17. However, by the mid-18th century, tomatoes were widely eaten in Britain, and before the end of that century, the Encyclopaedia Britannica stated the tomato was in daily use in soups, broths, and as a garnish. They were not part of the average person's diet, and though by 1820 they were described as to be seen in great abundance in all our vegetable markets and to be used by all our best cooks, reference was made to their cultivation in gardens still for the singularity of their appearance, while their use in cooking was associated with exotic Italian or Jewish cuisine. India. The tomato arrived in India by the way of Portuguese explorers, in the 16th century. It was grown from the 18th century onwards for the British. Even today, in Bengal, the alternative name is Bilati begun, Bengali, meaning foreign eggplant. It was then adopted widely as it is well suited to India's climate, with Uttarakhand as one of the main producers. Middle East and North Africa. The tomato was introduced to cultivation in the Middle East by John Barker, British consul in Aleppo circa 1799 to 1825. 19th century descriptions of its consumption are uniformly as an ingredient in a cooked dish. In 1881, it is described as only eaten in the region within the last 40 years. Today, the tomato is a critical and ubiquitous part of Middle Eastern cuisine, served fresh in salads, for example, Arab salad, Israeli salad, Shirazi salad and Turkish salad, grilled with kebabs and other dishes, made into sauces, and so on. United States. Plum, cherry, and grape tomato varieties. The earliest reference to tomatoes being grown in British North America is from 1710, when herbalist William Salmon reported seeing them in what is today South Carolina. 25 They may have been introduced from the Caribbean. By the mid-18th century, they were cultivated on some Carolina plantations, and probably in other parts of the southeast as well. Possibly, some people continued to think tomatoes were poisonous at this time, and in general, they were grown more as ornamental plants than as food. Thomas Jefferson, who ate tomatoes in Paris, sent some seeds back to America. 28 Some early American advocates of the culinary use of the tomato included Michelle Felice Corn and Robert Gibbon Johnson. Early tomato breeders included Henry Tilden in Iowa and a Dr. Hand in Baltimore. Alexander W. Livingston receives much credit for developing numerous varieties of tomato for both home and commercial gardeners. The U.S. Department of Agriculture's 1937 yearbook declared that half of the major varieties were a result of the abilities of the Livingstons to evaluate and perpetuate superior material in the tomato. Livingston's first breed of tomato, the Paragon, was introduced in 1870, the beginning of a great tomato culture enterprise in the county. In 1875, he introduced the Acme, which was said to be involved in the parentage of most of the tomatoes introduced by him and his competitors for the next 25 years. When Livingston began his attempts to develop the tomato as a commercial crop, his aim had been to grow tomatoes smooth in contour, uniform in size, and sweet in flavor. He eventually developed over 17 different varieties of the tomato plant. Today, the crop is grown in every state in the Union. Because of the long growing season needed for this heat-loving crop, several states in the U.S. Sun Belt became major tomato producers, particularly Florida and California. In California, tomatoes are grown under irrigation for both the fresh fruit market and for canning and processing. The University of California, Davis, UC Davis, became a major center for research on the tomato. The C.M. Rick Tomato Genetics Resource Center at UC Davis is a gene bank of wild relatives, monogenic mutants and miscellaneous genetic stocks of tomato. The center is named for the late Dr. Charles M. Rick, a pioneer in tomato genetics research. Research on processing tomatoes is also conducted by the California Tomato Research Institute in Escalon, California. In California, growers have used a method of cultivation called dry farming, especially with early girl tomatoes. This technique encourages the plant to send roots deep to find existing moisture in soil that retains moisture, such as clayey soil.